This is Center Stage, putting your firm in the spotlight by highlighting business owners and other industry experts to help take your firm to the next level. Hey everyone, and welcome to Center Stage. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week is a very special episode. I've talked before, we've had some episodes in the past just around mental health, and it's just a topic that I think is really important, especially for our audience who stereotypically faces a lot more severe challenges in that regard. And my guest this week is Sharon O'Connor. She is a therapist. She has a bunch of abbreviations at the end of her name. I don't know what all of them mean. She can probably explain them way better than I can, but she actually is my therapist. And I thought it would be really great for her to come on and just talk about, the concept of talking to a therapist or a counselor, like what happens in a session and all that kind of stuff, just to, kind of maybe break down some of those walls, some of that fear of the unknown, and maybe some hesitations that maybe you all have around this sort of thing. And so she was grateful enough to join us, and I'm really excited to just kind of see where this conversation goes. So Sharon, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So before we dive in, give us a little bit of background on you, what your story is, and why you do what you do.
Well, the first thing that came to mind is I do what I do because I love it. My background is, like all of us, I grew up in a home with lots of different kinds of people.
Yeah.
And my dad is or was a World War II vet. And I always wondered why he had these strange behaviors. He'd hear a loud sound, and we'd go like flying under the table.
Wow.
And my mom would say, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's from the war. Everything was from the war."
Right.
So I thought, that's really something different. Or he would sit, and it was always baseball. He would watch baseball games, and he could go like this, and he was not watching baseball games.
Mm.
He was someplace else in his mind. And another character in our family was my brother. He had an interesting mix of just challenges in his life. He had a speech impediment. He had a hard time learning. I later found out, I was not on maybe second grade, that he was dyslexic. And I thought, what's dyslexic? I don't see anything on him that makes him see backwards,
Yeah.
Just different kinds of things. And I was just always fascinated in that. I was always fascinated by how they say the world differently, or does he see people differently? And what makes my dad go there? And so anyway, it just stuck with me. One of my favorite things to do is read. And I read a ton because I love stories.
Yeah.
And to me, talking to people and hearing their stories, it's the preview to the book. I always think I should write a book about this. But it's just who I am. I come by this naturally. I find people very interesting. That's why I got into this.
Real quick. I mean, one of the things that I hear from a lot of people is they're like, well, I'm just a regular person. I'm just boring. Like there's nothing special or interesting about me, but like you probably then enjoy pulling out some of those things that make everybody unique.
You know what? Everybody is just naturally unique, and I don't work very hard on pulling it out. I just listen to them, and I find it fascinating. I mean, we work together.
Yeah.
I just find it fascinating. I might ask you something like, "Well, tell me more about that," or "Why did you do that?" or what? And then people just talk. It's not about I'm digging for asking them all these really deep, petty questions. No, we have a conversation, and for me anyway, it seems to just roll out naturally.
Right. So why then do people seek someone like you out in the first place? I think there's kind of this, at least for many years, there was this kind of negative connotation around it where I think people felt like, and maybe it was just portrayed like this in TV and movies, where like they only went and saw a therapist when they were like on the verge of a mental breakdown, or maybe they had the mental breakdown and now it's like some sort of court ordered thing. But in your experience, I mean, like, why do people come and seek you out in the first place?
Yeah, I really love that question because you're exactly right. People always had the movie version, the
Mm-hmm.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or The Shining, or all these creepy
Yeah.
movies. And people would think, oh my gosh, mental health, what a weird thing. Um, so I'm glad that you asked that because people come for many different reasons, but there's generally, they're having a life challenge of some sort. And I wrote a few things down here, so I'm going to be
Yeah.
glancing down every now and then, if that's okay.
Yeah.
People want to understand, why am I having these feelings? Why am I having these thoughts? You know, um, what are they all about?
Yeah.
What, what am I supposed to do with this? What do I do? And so that is kind of the premise, but what it looks like when they walk in the offices, they'll say things like, man, I've been really sad lately. And so then, when I explore the sadness and I learn more, I can find that maybe there's a little depression going on here. You know, when they tell me, I just can't get this out of my mind. I mean, I keep focusing on this event that happened in the past, and that tells me depression's about past.
Yeah.
Or they'll come in and they'll say, and this is especially true since COVID. Um, People will come in the office and they say, man, I'm so nervous all the time. I just can't stop worrying. I'm afraid. Anxiety is about the future.
Yeah.
Can't see what's going to happen. Are my kids going to get this? Am I going to lose all my money? Am I going to lose my job? It's that kind of stuff when people start worrying. So I just sit and listen to them,
Yeah.
and hear that story and hear about how they're thinking about these potential occurrences in their life, or this past occurrence in their life. How are they framing this?
Yeah.
Another reason that people come to therapy is there's a big change in their life,
Yeah.
a change in their job, a career shift. You might know that dog would start
Nah, it's all good.
yeah, can you hear it? Um, anyway, um, there's a career shift. They're getting married. They're getting unmarried. um, Babies are born. Parents die. There's something's changing. So that's another real common one. It's like, what do I do with this? How do I move through this? Um, Grief and loss. We just touched on that. That's another big one. COVID scared a lot of us. With the
Yeah.
news every night of how many people were dying. That's frightening.
Yeah.
And we as humans, we respond to fear. We respond to it differently, but we're going to respond to it. So family issues. It maybe you just got a diagnosis that you just didn't want to hear, or someone in your family is suffering with a chronic health condition. You know that affects us all,
Yeah.
and that's the beautiful thing. That is the really beautiful thing about humans. Life affects us. You
Yeah.
affect me. I affect you, and I kind of like that.
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to walk through
One of
life in
the,
life.
yeah. And one of the things that, at least for me, like one of my big hesitations about it early on was that I couldn't wrap my head around the concept of talking about things to make it better, right? Like, I'm very analytical, this, and a lot of our audience is. a lot of our audience, lawyers, financial people, they're very analytically driven. And
Mhm.
for, also as I think just in a society, we see more or less like material things, physical things as solutions. If you got a headache, you can take a pill to get rid of the headache. If you break your leg, you can get surgery and you then see the cast and everything. But then for some reason, when it comes to our minds, there's
Mhm.
just something weird about talking about it that then makes it better. And I don't know, like, how does that work? I've been doing this with you for a few months now, and I still don't really fully understand it. I've seen it work because I do feel better and I have new perspectives and everything. But like, why does talking about things work?
John, we are wired to talk about things. That's just who we are. It's a way of release. The number one technique that we use in therapy is talk,
Yeah.
is talk about it. Get it off your chest. If you can't find anybody to talk to, write it. Get it out there. It's not that they're going to give you some magic solution. It's that it's kind of like, oh, I just got rid of it. It's
Yeah.
it's no longer in me. It's out there. And that in and of itself feels good.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. And
feels
I
good.
think, I think kind of what I had always seen it as was, you know, I didn't realize like communication served necessarily multiple purposes, right? Like I had just seen like, oh, I talk to, communicate to another person, not necessarily to, I guess, kind of communicate through myself. Like I can talk to other people to order food or to, buy materials or to explain a concept to a person. And I never saw it as, I guess, like also like a way to solve like inward problems. It was always something outward. I think that's the wording that I'm looking for. Like I always saw it as more of an outward projection rather than something that I can use inwardly.
You're exactly right. And I'm sitting here listening to you, and I want to ask you
Yeah, go for it.
to reflect on what you just said. You've heard that before, right? What did you hear yourself just say?
Yeah.
What did you say? You said just a little bit ago that you don't know how it worked, but it seemed to work. You felt
Right.
better.
And then I
And
just
when you
explained. Yeah.
exactly what you and I, it's that's what I love about you is that you can talk and you do tell great stories. And I hope you don't mind me utilizing our sessions a little
No,
bit.
absolutely. Like honestly, like if this turned into a mini session right now, it's totally fine.
What's really great about you, and that's what a therapist has to do. They have to look at a person and they have to hear them and they say, all right, how do I communicate with them to make the most headway with them so that I want to be a chameleon. I want to kind of turn into John's communication style.
Mhm.
And your communication style is like you're talking to a thing, and you tell great stories like on your podcast. You
Yeah.
really do. So I tap into that. And I'll say, tell me about that. Tell me a story about that. Tell me what happened when that. I'm I'm thinking you probably have noticed that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'll go from there. Well, then I'll start the feeling questions. How does it feel? What does that
Yeah.
look like for you? So it's about getting to know your client and utilizing their strengths to help them combat their own weaknesses.
Yeah.
What I do is I'm reflecting to you, and there's something that I want to say that's super important about therapy, no
Yeah.
matter who you're working with. The most important thing about therapy is the relationship between the client and the therapist. I don't really do anything to make you want to talk to me. I watch, yes, for your strengths and your skills, and I'll tap into that. That's called positive psychology. I'm going to use your skills.
Right.
Um, I'm going to use your strengths. But if you don't like me for whatever reason, you don't like my hair, I remind you of your great aunt that wore weird perfume. No, you're not going to want to talk to me. You're not going to want to be present with me. And so it's the relationship. And you know what? It goes the same for me. I mean, if a client walks in and I think, whoa, this is, I get this flashback of, whoa, I don't want to go there. I mean, I'm human too.
Right.
I will hopefully gracefully refer you and say, you know what, I'm probably not the best therapist for you, and refer them. And
Yeah.
the same thing, if you come to me for therapy and you think, oh no, it's okay to say, you know what, Sharon, I'm not clicking with you. I don't think you're the best for me. And you can even ask me for a referral, and I'll give you a few names. Here you go, take pick.
Yeah.
That because that is the kind of the cocoon within which therapy does its best work. It's that relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, we talked about, obviously it's a conversation. You're listening to people talk. I mentioned, like, people have kind of these preconceived notions, what they see on TV, where, you're sitting in a chair, you've got your notebook, they're maybe sitting on this big lounge chair, laying down, just kind of looking up at the ceiling, talking about their life. But that's not really how it goes, right? So, you know, it's more or less, I mean, at least for you and I, we're sitting on a couch together, we're talking, I'm not laying down, whatever, and all that. But there are different ways that it goes, right? And
Oh
so
yeah. Oh yeah.
tell everyone about just kind of some of the different ways that you go, because like I know for you, like you also have, I don't know if holistic's the right word for it, but like you also have a focus on like meditations and yoga and stuff like that, and that works for a lot of people. So like what are like some different methods or like types of sessions that are out there available to people?
Sure. I'm so glad you asked that. Um, let's start out with saying that our thoughts, they're up here in our head,
Yeah.
but they don't stay in our head. They always go into our body. And that's a beautiful thing because we can move our bodies. And just what you said, yes, I am a body, mind, spirit therapist. I'm going to use all the things that I can to help you move that thought out, to help you change that thought. And as you see now, I'm kind of demonstrating. When I'm with a client, I will literally do this. When I see that they need to move that thought out, that's not so much you. I mean, we have done some movement things, and I noted, that wasn't really John's cup of tea. So I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to try something new. But for a lot of people, the actual movement, let's just push that thing right out. Let's push it out here where we can see it.
Yeah.
Okay. And for that, yes, I do use yoga. I use going for a walk.
Yeah.
Just if it is something that I see that can work, art therapy. There are so many different types of therapy. Art therapy, especially for kids.
Yeah.
They really like art therapy. Dance therapy, another form of movement. Um, the whole somatic stuff, somatic means in and of the body, moving the body, changing position of the body. If you change the position of your body, and then I give a suggestion, like stand like that thought, stand like your mother stood when she said that to you. Oh, people, right now. Okay. Now, move your hands and you add layers on, you get the whole body engaged. It takes a person so much less time to come up with a solution. Like, I just want to say, and it's like, well, let's say that.
Yeah.
The solution is in you. The solution is in you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
No,
our
I
job
agree.
through all these different types of therapies, like I say, dance and art, and there's even um, equestrian therapy, animal therapy. There's all kinds. It's out there, and the best way to find it is Google it.
Yeah.
Just Google
Yeah.
it. It's going to come up. You're me, you know?
Yeah. And like, how would you, like, what kind of advice would you have for someone who's trying to figure out then, like, what works best for them?
Mhm. Try it.
Yeah.
You know, like like with you and I using that example again, the time we went for a walk. I could tell that you weren't comfortable with that. And I thought, note to self, okay, but what you are comfortable in is what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
Talking. That's your comfort zone. Telling stories. That's your comfort zone. And if somebody's telling you a story, you know what? Doesn't matter right now if that story is true or not. If they believe it, it's true. And so I'm going to start to ask them questions. Tell me more about that. How did that make you feel? What did you do afterwards? It just begin to tease things out. And you know what? There's always two people listening, me
Yeah.
and you. You're listening to your own words. And again, the solutions are in you. So I'm going to say, you know what I heard you just say? And I'm going to reflect it back to him. You know that. I do that all the time.
Yeah.
And then you take it and you run with it.
Yeah. So, I mean, how do you, because I mean, you've talked about like kind of maybe once you've gotten a little bit of momentum with someone, you can ask them, okay, how did that make you feel? Or tell me more about that. But like, how do you get someone to really open up initially? Is there anything you can do, or is it really more on that person to have already kind of resolved to be open-minded and just say, like, I'm going to try this and I'm going to participate? Or is there anything that you do at the start to get them to open up and dig into more or less why they're there in the first place?
Right. I ask them why they're there. We have this process that's called an intake. And I'm one of those people that send all the intake forms to you beforehand.
Yep.
Just so when you come in, we can start.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, let's get this thing rolling. I want to see results for you as much as you do. I want to see things happen. That's just my personality.
Yeah.
So what happens is you're going to come in, you're going to have your intake paperwork, your 5 pages of it, which is a whole bunch of questions. And we're going to go through the majority of those questions. And then that question of why are you here will always come up. What is it that you want from therapy? What do you want to gain from this? And then I always ask, what are you willing to put into it?
Yeah.
Because people will say, oh, I want to do this, or I want to do, they'll tell you. It's like, okay, well then that's where I'm going to start.
Yeah.
I'm going to start once again with something that's comfortable for you. I want this to be a relationship. I want to make you feel comfortable. However, I also want to challenge you. So I've got to get a relationship going and to the place that I can challenge you at some point. I'm not going to jump in the boat right out of the gate, say, oh, wait a minute here, and challenge you. I kind of work up to that place. But once again, it's listening to that person, and that person that court ordered, spouse ordered,
Yeah.
that person's, can I say pissed on air?
Oh yeah.
That person's pissed right out of the gate. They don't want to be there, you
Yeah.
know. I say, and we're going to talk a little bit about this later, I hope. Thank you, COVID, for changing how we do therapy, for
Yeah.
giving us the options to do what you and I are doing right now, Zoom.
Yeah.
For some people, that is such a blessing because they're just so uncomfortable to walk into that office, to sit in that waiting room, to think, oh my God, I'm in the shrink's office and all that stuff. Well,
Yeah.
here, they don't have to do that. And for that, I'm thankful. But for those people that I really don't want to do this, everybody likes to be heard.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be heard. I have no preconceived notion of you, whether you come from a court, whether you come from your wife said, if you don't do this, we're done.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to me. I want to hear, going right back to the beginning of me, I want to hear your story.
Yeah.
I want to hear your story. And that for me is that's the hook for me. That's what catches me. It's like, oh my gosh, that's really fascinating. Fascinating. It might be awful. It might be tragic. It might be so painful. I do feel that.
Yeah.
And that resonates with people. Just the fact that you're real, it's like, oh, that hurts. I'm not going to sit there and cry with them, but, at that point, because I don't want them to think, oh my gosh, what a wimp. But I'm going to let myself be there and sit there with them and experience that. And when they understand that, this magic thing happens. I wish I had an answer to say, you're asking what specifically? It just kind of happens.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. Cause I mean, I've been there and we've had some small moments like that. And one of the things that you mentioned, earlier, just about, how you will challenge people. And that was one of the things that I wanted when I first got into it. I didn't want to go into it. And I didn't want like everything that I thought to be validated. Right. I didn't want someone to be like, oh yeah, no, yes, you're absolutely right. You're totally right for feeling that way. Or, you're 100% right about this thing that you've diagnosed yourself with. Like, no, you challenged it, not in a way where it's like, no, you're wrong. You're an idiot for thinking that. No, it wasn't like that. It was, but you were able to, I think, help bring out other perspectives that I and other people in my similar situation would not have yet considered or hadn't even gotten to that point yet.
Well, thank you. But you said something so important. And that is, you said, I didn't want everything to be validated. I didn't want, and you said that in our first session.
Yep.
You told me, remember I asked what you're going to put into it? You told me what you didn't want. You told me the way you wanted things to go. Well, I heard you. All right,
Yeah.
then that's what we'll do.
Yeah. But what's, I think, some people might hear that and be like, well, if you're just doing what your patients want, how then are they going to get helped? But I think the genius in it is that you're still, you know, you're just communicating in a way that resonates with them. You're not just laying down and just letting them feel like everything has been going their way. Like you can still communicate with them in a way that still shows a lot of progress. And maybe some people do get tricked into thinking, well, I did this all on my own and whatever. But like that's not the case. Like, at least you, in the experience that I've had, have that ability to, you mentioned earlier, chameleon in such a way to where you can communicate with people and still challenge them, still force them, for lack of a better term, to consider different perspectives and alternatives that on their own, in trying to maybe handle their problems themselves, they would have never gotten to.
I really think, John, that that's my job.
Yeah.
You know, I if people are here and they want to be here, all right,
Yeah.
there has to be, or well, let's move. Let's remember I said I don't want to just sit there and be nice lady.
Yeah.
um,
Right.
I want to move. I want the journey.
Yeah.
I want to see the growth. Um, I want to go through the tough stuff. And what you're talking about now, John, is style.
Yeah.
No, that's just my style. Every therapist does it differently. Um, some people don't like my style. They want the real, by the book, by the like the TV version.
Yeah.
Um, that's what some people want. It's, that's just not how it comes out of me. It's just not how it happens for me. And that's why I say it's about the relationship. And that's why I say, hey, I'll give you a referral. I mean, I
Yeah.
know people like that. And it wouldn't work for me, but it works for their clients.
Yeah.
And we have to respect that in people. That's okay.
Yeah.
But we're talking about that's just how I do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I mean, and it just shows that, everyone has different ways of communicating and how they perceive themselves and the world around them and all of that. And so one of the last things that I wanted to ask you is, does therapy end? And when I say that, I mean, like, you know, I think, do you ever get to a point where, let's say, to use the example, that you mentioned earlier, let's say someone is going through uh grieving a loss, right? And they come and they're coming to you. They just struggle to cope with it, and they're struggling to get through it. Does it ever get to a point where you're like, hey, I think you're good now, I think you've resolved everything,
mhm.
and I don't, there's not much else I can do? Or, and I think this is what usually might happen, is along the way, as you've developed a relationship with someone, you know, you get through the grieving issue that they had come to you with again, but as you've developed a relationship with it, you've developed that trust, you've now unpacked other things that you then continue on with, and now it's more of just, it's almost like going to the gym, where you go and you're just consistently working on yourself. Is that kind of how it usually goes?
Yep, I have both kind of clients. There are those that they do their work, boom, 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 and they get to a place where they're strong again, and they can move through that situation. They know how to move through that situation now without getting stuck.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're right, something else comes up, and they think, well, while I'm here, I might as well,
Right.
and so they begin to unpack other things. I do have those kinds of clients, and that's great. I also have the ones where, okay, I know what to do now, thanks a lot, it's nice knowing you. And that's okay too. But whatever it is, whatever kind of client it is, I, again, as you know, I am really big on teaching skills. I want them to know what I know. I want to give that stuff away.
Yeah.
It's like, here's this technique, let's practice this, use this, try this over the week. Um, do these certain kinds of things. I've got bags of them, if you will. I
Yeah.
call them my bag tricks. um, and I want you to have that, because life keeps rolling and it has a way of repeating itself. And we have our little sensitivities, and it's like, oh, I bumped into that again, and oh, that hurts. But I know tapping, I know breath work, I know movement, I know the ants exercise. So
Yeah.
I want to give you these things. So if you're out there, in a way, then therapy never ends. But now you are doing it for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's wonderful. So I think that's my job.
Yeah. And yeah, and I think that, now that I'm in it, like I can't recommend it enough. And you mentioned one thing here, and we'll wrap up here. You mentioned that COVID really changed therapy and how you do it. A lot of people go through Zoom now versus maybe going in person. I mean, have you seen, you know, have you seen like more people kind of being more open to it because they can do it over Zoom, or what sorts of things have you seen just in terms of how things have changed since COVID?
Yeah, I think COVID was really kind of a blessing in disguise in some ways, at least for my profession, because COVID, excuse me, removed a stigma by giving us all a condition.
Yeah.
You know, um, I mean, anxiety became rampant, and anxiety is that fear of the future.
Yeah.
And people started worrying, what am I going to do in school? I mean, how am I going to get through this year? What happens if my parents get sick? Anxiety is about hypervigilance. It's worrying about the future. And didn't we all kind of get blessed with a nice dose of anxiety during COVID?
Yeah.
Um, and so that for my profession, though, was a blessing, I say, because it opened the doors to saying, yeah, this is therapy. This is
Yeah.
not mental illness. In my profession, we call anxiety, depression, those kinds of things. Those are mood disorders. Those are not cognitive illnesses that you're just going to have for the rest
Yeah.
of your life. That's a different thing. But I mean, when I work with cognitive illnesses, we do the whole same thing. I mean, they're with a psychiatrist as well. I'm kind of getting all over here, but um, COVID said, well, if I can have this and you can have this, it's okay. It's all right. I there's no It removed that stigma. So it removed a really thin layer, you
Yeah.
know, with anxiety and depression. And that's enough to kick the door open and to get people talking about it. Some of the good things that happened from it was, like you said, we have a new modality that has been approved. And for some people, that's such a blessing. Um, the workplace like yours has embraced mental health and have invited therapists like myself in and
Yeah.
say, this is a benefit I want to give to my employees. And um, that's huge, for just the employer, the employee, because now we're coming together as people, not employee, employer. We're
Yeah.
coming together as human.
Yeah.
And I think that is wonderful. Schools are recognizing kids in trouble, whereas before, not so much. They
Yeah.
were given detention.
Right. Yeah.
uh,
Well, yeah. I mean, you and I talked about this pretty early on. I mean, I grew up in a very rural area where, you know, ADD was just someone who wasn't disciplined, or someone who was depressed, just someone who had a bad attitude. Or like
right.
the only examples of mental illness was either the naked crazy guy yelling at nothing on the street corner, or just the reality of it, just in the environment I grew up in, or it was someone who maybe identified as homosexual. Like, that was the only mental illness that was ever really recognized. And I think now, to your point, with COVID, and even, just like my generation and Gen Z and younger, like, it's not stigmatized like it was maybe with older generations. Like, it's okay the phrase now is like, it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to talk about it and be open about it, because it doesn't mean that you're like irreparably broken. It's just a thing that you deal with. Like, some people, you know
Exactly.
yeah, like, some people, there are people like me who don't have hair on their head versus other people who have a full head of hair. It's just it's just an aspect of being human that some people have and some people don't.
Yes, that is true. And, I want to tell you that I, when I started my schooling for this, everything was thrown in the mental illness bucket. Okay.
Yeah.
From ADHD to whatever. It was all thrown in with there's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
And I never liked that. I always felt uncomfortable because I would say, well, wait a minute, there's nothing wrong with my dad. He experienced something. This was an adaptation,
Yeah.
the way his life.
Yeah.
Um, so a lot of what we're coming to understand, let's just take ADD.
Yeah.
Um, for example, I don't believe that's an illness. I believe it's an adaptation.
Yeah.
And so that makes me want to ask, what happened to you?
Hmm.
You talked about where you live. You talk about we're put in these situations and we have to adapt. We have to create something within us to protect us. We have to create something within us to get along with, to be successful in that kind of environment.
Yeah.
You also mentioned like homosexuality. I don't look at that as a mental illness.
Right.
I look at that as an adaptation of who you are.
Yeah.
I'm going to be successful. And so right now we're in a great space in my profession because we're questioning, is this really, you know, built on, it's all built on theory
Yeah.
until Dr. Daniel Amen started doing the brain scans and we thought, whoa, wait a minute, there's plasticity. We can actually change how this develops. That's opened the barn doors, baby. It's all up for grabs now.
Yeah.
And now I love my profession because I can say and feel good about it. Yeah, that's an adaptation. That's not an illness.
Yeah.
You're okay. And I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
I realize that there's illnesses, and we can work with those, but not everything we see is an illness. And I think that's wrong, giving labels to people with the caveat that you're sick.
Yeah.
No, you're strong. You've adapted and you're strong. My dad adapted and he was strong. Might not have looked like it from the outside, but when you
Yeah.
know the story,
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you and I have talked about this. And I mean, I don't think that I've said this on this podcast before, but I was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. And like even making preliminary research, and learning about this, there's just this giant cloud of confusion about what that even actually means, and just what defines the autism spectrum in general. And for some people, you can make the argument that it might be an illness versus maybe someone like me where it's more of an adaptation. I don't know, like we're still early on in trying to figure it out, and how people have adapted to mask things, or to chameleon things, or whatever the case may be. And I think that going to therapy and just talking through it makes a huge difference in being able to either relieve some of the fears and anxieties or doubts that people might have, or it helps them get clarity and helps them really understand, okay, no, this is the way it is. Maybe I'm not, like I said earlier, I'm not broken. This is just how things are in that moment, and maybe I do have to adapt and maybe work a little bit harder to get to a better place, but that's okay because I have that path forward.
yes. Couple of things I want to say.
Yeah.
Um, yes, I did mention that things are adaptations. I'm not ready to say that autism spectrum is an
Oh yeah.
adaptation. Um,
Yeah.
however, what you're a prime example of, because it's a spectrum.
Yeah.
Okay. What you're a prime example of, John, is that generally in autism, or most of the time, in autism, people aren't as willing to speak. People aren't as willing to be in public and speak. That's not the case with you. I mean, you're out speaking to audiences.
Yeah.
You have a show. So maybe how you've adapted to your autistic tendencies is by doing this. Yes,
Right.
you're speaking, but you're behind the big
Right.
microphone thing. And you've once told me that, yeah, I can speak to audiences because I stick to the script.
Yeah.
Remember saying that? I
Yeah.
stick to the script. And I thought, okay, so you kind of block the rest of us out. Um, the other thing that is so important is you didn't live alone. And I think it's so important for those individuals like myself living with my dad and my brother, your family living with a person with autism. How does that affect you? What accommodations, to use kind of a special ed
Yeah.
term,
Yeah.
have you put forth to help this person to live in a cohesive unit? I mean, that's our goal. People need people. Isolation is awful for us. It's deadly. So we create these adaptations so that we can live together. And that's what we're talking about. You know, even people with autism can still create adaptations. We learn them. This works for me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was helpful or not, but
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. And so the last question that I had, just to kind of cover something that you mentioned earlier, in terms of like the concept of like a disorder versus an illness, and we talked about like COVID, for example, a lot of people developed some anxieties around that, like at what point, if you could even remotely quantify it, at what point does like temporary anxiety or even just like a specific anxiety about a specific thing, when at what point does it become so severe that it is an illness, if that makes
when it
sense?
stops you from living your natural life, when it stops you from taking that step forward, when it stops you.
Yeah.
And that's how oftentimes like parents will notice in their kids, wait a minute, they're doing something differently. They're not moving forward.
Yeah.
Um, and that's how we begin to recognize illnesses like schizophrenia that has a later onset. Parents will say, they're not meeting with their friends anymore, or they're isolating in their room. There's these different markers that we can see. Oh,
Yeah.
wait a minute, something has changed here. So then we start changing our focus and exploring other things.
Yeah. And then I would imagine though that you don't need to wait for it to become an illness. You don't need to wait for it to get to a point where you can't live your life to start taking measures to address it.
And that's pretty much what I do with teaching techniques.
Yeah.
Um, some people, yes, the illness is going to progress. Yes, I can't stop that. But
Right.
what I can do is teach you techniques and strategies to help you. Like I I have a son that has some special needs, and to help him, I had to teach him, okay, you need to do this. Your brother might not need that, but you need to do an example. At work, he needs to go to work a little bit earlier or do this at the end of his day. And that's get everything ready. Get everything ready. When he was little, it's like, what do you want to wear tomorrow?
Yeah.
Start him thinking. You build these routines, you build these skills and techniques so that when he comes in, all he sees is all this stuff, and he'll just stand there.
Yeah.
Like, God, where do I begin? So I'm like, let's focus it to a little piece, and you have that ready. So when you get to work, you can just, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing today.
Yeah.
Okay. So, even people with different mental illness can benefit from seeing a therapist, a counselor. They're generally under a psychiatrist's care, but they can benefit from seeing a counselor to learn these techniques and these skills to help them get over their daily hurdles.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a personal trainer for your brain, more or less, I think. So
That's kind of neat. That's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's gonna wrap it up here. I mean, this has been really great. I know that you've given a lot of really good insight. I hope all of you out there got something from it. Continue to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, wherever you're consuming the show. And I would really love to hear what everyone thought about this episode. So if you want to reach out to us and email me and let me know what you thought, you can reach me at John, JOHN, at spotlightbranding.com. And I would really love to hear what you thought about this week's episode. But that's going to do it. Sharon, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. To learn more, go to spotlightbranding.com/centerstage.